It's Tuesday, October 24th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It is a hell of a day to talk ball, and joining me to do just that is Andy Behrens. Andy, what's going on, buddy?
What's going on? Well, the Bears are back again. That's exciting.
Excellent.
I got knocked out of Survivor, which is a bummer. The Bills took me out. It's a bummer, but I almost never make it to October, so it's been kind of a magical ride for me. So made a lot of friends along the way, so I'm still feeling pretty good about that. I'm still riding the high.
Well, a couple of things to follow up on there. One, shout out to you. I've never once heard about your Survivor pool, whereas another co-host on this podcast who shall go nameless, right. I must check in on his Survivor pool every single week. So that's a shout out to you on that. Yeah, I texted you yesterday, but you need to share this with the podcast audience. What is the temperature check-in on the Bears fan group chat that you just that you mentioned last week? How are they feeling about Tyson Bagent?
Oh, the league chat is fired up. The South suburbs are fired up. They're really, you know what it was, and obviously the Bears came out in a competent manner in Week 7. It was a game plan that looked an awful lot like the opener, which nobody liked. Right? It was all screens. It was all stuff like behind the line of scrimmage. Tyson Bagent's average depth of target on the day was 2.5. So that Beautiful. It wasn't. Yeah. It wasn't like explosive offense by any means, but he did the thing that a lot of Bears fans, a lot of football fans, any meathead fan is going to love, right? Like early in the game, there's a play in which everybody for the Raiders sort of dropped back into coverage, and Bagent had a lot of room to run. He picked up a first down, little first down with his legs, not something that we'd seen necessarily a ton of from him. And then as he's circling back to the line of scrimmage, he like engages with fans, and he looks up into the stands, and he's asking for noise, right? He's cajoling the crowd. Oh boy, does that play well to a certain variety of Bears fans. So everybody in the league chat is getting like Jim McMahon vibes, right? Which to a certain to like certain generation of Chicagoans, that's the highest compliment that you can pay a professional athlete. So they're so excited about Bagent. One guy, I think, taught himself maybe how to use emojis. He's not an emoji guy, but every time Bagent would complete one of these, every time we'd get another 5-yard completion, target emoji.
My God.
that was really fun. Everybody's pretty excited. I'm not getting QB of the future vibes here, but whatever. I don't want to disrupt anybody's good time.
What a tortured existence to be a type of person that has to watch Tyson Bagent and put dart emojis into the group chat. That must be an absolutely horrendous existence. But hey, shout out to your friends. Hey, well, Tyson Bagent actually transitions us nicely into what I want to talk about today. I know we usually do here, and we will do the People's Panic Meter, the Coping Corner, everything you and I normally do, Andy, on the Tuesday show. But I wanted to take this moment at, we're heading into week 8, I guess the midpoint of the season, basically, certainly the midpoint of fantasy football seasons, if that's not already come and gone, and sort of do kind of like a quarterback meta discussion. Quietly, I think this is emerging as the theme of the NFL season, and I think its trickle-down impact on fantasy is real. Shout out to producer Colin, who found this stat from Steven Ruiz's article in The Ringer, and Steven does great work at The Ringer, and this is a really good piece that I want to dive into in full. The title of it is 2023 the year of the NFL defensive coordinator? I think that's certainly possible. Defense appears to, unlike the Bears, be actually back. Defense is back. The defensive player of the year race is extremely exciting to talk about this season. Yeah. So that should be pretty cool. This stat that Steven has in his article, NFL teams are averaging minus 0.4 EPA per offensive snap. That is the lowest mark we've seen since the turn of the century, which is as far back as True Media's database goes. I would also, that this is true, right? I think that defenses have played really well. Like I said, I think defense is back, and that can be a theme of this season. I also think quarterback play and a severe downtick in NFL quarterback play this year is emerging as a theme of the season here. And if you're panicking out there, which is why it fits for this episode, if you're panicking about a breakout wide receiver who isn't happening, or like a running back that is stuck in a slog of an offense, I think this is the reason why. So like I said, this dawned on me in week 7 last week on Sunday, where we had backups like Tyson Bagent, no disrespect to the future Bears Hall of Famer, Brian Hoyer, Tyrod Taylor, PJ Walker starting, playing a ton of snaps for teams who already had quarterbacks that were failing to meet expectations, and that's putting it kindly. I would contend that quarterback play, like I said, is at the lowest point in the last 10 years. A lot of it to me is, Rodgers is out of the mix this year because of injuries. And it's like we've seen just the old guard is now completely off the board. And really, like, if we're being honest, the next wave has not stepped up. So, Andy, I want to go division by division to help make this point. I'm going to list off each team's starter in every division. And I want you to tell me if you think that each quarterback has played good football wire to wire so far through 7 weeks. And in the end, we're going to count how many true, reliable, good starters we have in the NFL right now. So let's start, Andy, with the AFC East. Miami Dolphins, I think we can agree Tua has played good football wire to wire. So that's 1.
Yes.
Josh Allen, Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, so here's the thing. I feel like we hold Josh Allen to perhaps a different standard than other. Like, Josh Allen is actually the QB1 fantasy-wise right now. It's propped up a little bit by rushing. It's propped up a little bit by the fact that we don't punish interceptions perhaps as much as we should, right? Like, there's an outside chance that Josh Allen throws 18, 20 interceptions this year, right? So I'm not gonna say that he's played wire to wire great football. I mean, shoot, they nearly lost to the Giants and then they just lost to the Pats.
Yeah. I still kind of want to include him just because, like, he's a proven player we don't have any questions about, right? So we'll just say 2 for the benefit of the doubt. We'll say 2 so far. Obviously, New York Jets, Zach Wilson, no. New England Patriots, Mac Jones, no. No fight from you there.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, AFC North, Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson, yes.
Yes. Even the rough games, fantasy wise, have actually looked really good for Lamar often.
100%. Yeah, and he's obviously coming off a great game this past week. Pittsburgh Steelers, Kenny Pickett, no.
Nope.
Cleveland Browns, Deshaun Watson, no.
No.
Joe Burrow, Cincinnati Bengals, no, definitely not.
No, largely injury related, but no, hard no.
Okay, AFC South, Jacksonville Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence, yes or no for you on this one?
I'm a yes on this. I think he's played better than the year-to-date stats.
I am also going to give a yes on this one as well. Houston Texans, CJ Stroud, emphatic yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Indianapolis Colts. What do you think of this one's? This one's tough. I mean, but with Gardner Minshew at the helm, we got to say no, and he's a backup anyways. Like, he fumbled the ball a bunch of times. He threw interceptions. Like, I would not say they fit in this category.
Yeah, it was really rough a couple of weeks ago. The little bit of recency bias makes me want to say, oh, I don't know, it was something. And like, if you combine what we've got from Gardner Minshew and Richardson, I'd say it's a little bit better than I'd expected. But overall, no, we had a low moment from Gardner just a couple of weeks ago. So this is a no.
Yeah, better than expected doesn't mean good.
Right.
Tennessee Titans, definitely not Ryan Tannehill, and it could probably get worse going forward. AFC West, Patrick Mahomes, obvious yes. Las Vegas Raiders, Jimmy Garoppolo, obvious no. Los Angeles Chargers, we're going to talk about Justin Herbert in this show. I think we have to say no at this point.
Yeah, well, I'd basically say this is pretty similar to Josh Allen, where I hold him to a different standard. He's coming off a relatively poor game. It is not everything that you would have expected from him, and there have been some really sloppy moments. So I would say no on Herbert. Okay,
and if I'm going to say that, then I have to be fair, and I have to take Allen off the list. So that's actually gotten us down now to 4 quarterbacks here. And Russell Wilson, Broncos. I know some of the efficiency metrics look pretty good, and I'm not saying he's been the Broncos' biggest problem, but I would still say no.
Yeah, that's a no.
Okay, NFC East. Jalen Hurts.
Oh, this is such a weird one. He's another guy who's like low key on pace for a crazy interception total on the season. The fantasy year again propped up a little bit by rushing stats and AJ Brown. I mean, this is just like Herbert and Josh Allen, where the team itself doesn't have questions at quarterback. No one's saying that, but there have been some moments and some games that are mild disappointments. I mean, shoot, he's the QB2 on the year, right? But it hasn't been perfect.
I'm going to mark him no, and I'm going to put him in the same category with the other guys that we'll talk about here in a second. Okay, Dak Prescott, Dallas Cowboys. I'm kind of leaning no-ish, or maybe yes-ish.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
All right,
some of that is just the Niners game. So, like recently in my head.
Yeah, he's had his best and worst game of the season in recent memory, which I think makes him a little tough to judge. But I'll put him in the no, category over here. Okay, Washington Commanders, hell no. New York Giants, absolutely not. Even if Tyrod's been their best quarterback this year, but the guy they planned on starting is no.
Yeah.
All right, NFC North. Complicated discussion because of yesterday's results, but Detroit Lions, Jared Goff, yes or no? I kind of want to give him the benefit of the doubt and say yes, but he obviously is coming off a horrendous performance.
Yeah, I mean, I do too. Like there's going to be a bad performance in every season. If our standard here is they have been absolutely great in every game, then it's a no. But I certainly think Jared Goff has exceeded expectations. Again, I know I'm using like a sliding scale for all these guys, and I probably shouldn't do that. But for me, I think Goff is more yes than no.
I think he's more yes than no too. So that's our first NFC quarterback in the definitive yes category. We even waffled on that one, so we're up to 6 now in total. Minnesota Vikings, Kirk Cousins. I think we have to say no.
I don't know. I mean, we're recording this ahead of the Niners game, right, obviously, which, the Niners can do some things to you.
It'll probably be no by tomorrow morning when this comes out.
Yeah. This for me is like a really loose yes on its way to no.
Yes. Okay. So I'm leaning no to prove the point. Next two teams in the NFC North, Packers, really problematic no, and your Bears, I would also say no.
Hard no. Yeah.
NFC South, is there any, this entire division is a hell no to me. Anyone you want to cape up for between Desmond Ridder, Baker Mayfield, Derek Carr, the check down king, or Bryce Young?
There certainly is not. The lasting image for me of Derek Carr is him just chewing out Chris Olave for something that, man, I don't know. Maybe not Olave's fault.
Honestly, it's a good thing we did not record a podcast about that episode. We did not record a podcast episode about that game. I'll leave it at that. Okay, so the entire NFC South is a no. NFC West, Brock Purdy, San Francisco 49ers, obviously pending Monday Night Football, but I'm still going to say an emphatic yes.
Yes, a yes.
Geno Smith, Seattle Seahawks, yes or no?
This is another one that's probably more yes than no. Hasn't been as great as last year. It's not, they're not losing. It's probably a loose yes for me.
Loose yes. Colin is erupting in the chat that we said no to Dak, but yes to Geno. Don't care. It's our show. So we will say yes for Geno, but I'm a little less convinced about it than Andy. Los Angeles Rams, Matthew Stafford. I'll give a yes to Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually feel like Stafford is one of the low key things that I was most wrong about and didn't think hard enough about coming into the season, right? Like all those relatively good off-season reports on his health. I didn't really factor it into my rank. I didn't really factor it into my projection for the team generally. Not that things have been spectacular over the last couple of weeks, but he just looks so good so early. I've been really impressed.
Same. All right, and final team, Arizona Cardinals. I think we're at a no now with Josh Dobbs.
Yeah, that'd be a no.
All right, so that gives us, out of 32 NFL teams, we have 9 in the emphatic yes category, and I'm even sus that we put Geno in this. So really, I think I think that's a rough percentage, man. Our NFC yeses are Goff, Brock Purdy, Geno Smith, and Matthew Stafford. And I think people will at least fight us on Goff and Geno there. In the AFC, we had 5, Tua, Lamar, Lawrence, and I think people would fight you on Lawrence,
for sure.
CJ Stroud, and Patrick Mahomes. We had a group of 4 quarterbacks here. We had a group of 5 quarterbacks here in Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, and Dak Prescott. And again, I think people might put others in this category too, that we know are good players but are not playing their best football right now. So that is a wild, I think, realization that we have 9 quarterbacks that I don't think everybody would come to a consensus on that are good, quality, consistent starters in the NFL right now.
Yeah, and so the way this has spilled over into fantasy, number one, we don't have anybody running away with the position, right? Like the whole reason that so many people got aggressive at quarterback this year, drafting, whether it was Allen or Mahomes or Hurts in like round 2, round 3, was that in recent years, last 5 years or so, there's been a league winner at this spot like almost every year, and that is an overused term, but there really has been like a golden ticket sort of player. Almost every season at this spot. Like some of the greatest quarterbacking seasons statistically that we've ever seen have been really recently, basically beginning with like Lamar and Mahomes going nuts, 5 years ago. Nobody's running away with it. Like Josh Allen has like a 3-point lead over Jalen Hurts, and not like neither one of them is playing their best football, right? Like, so there hasn't been anybody that has justified that early draft price. And then the next group that you were counting on, they're nowhere to be seen in like the next tier at quarterback, right?
Oh, yeah.
So Burrow, Lawrence, Fields, Herbert, like anybody other than Deshaun Watson, right? Like he was basically a top 10 quarterback. None of those guys are challenging like for top 5 status, anything like that. You mentioned the disappointment that people are feeling with Trevor Lawrence. Again, I think he looks really good. I mean, it's indisputable that he doesn't have a game with over 2 touchdown passes on the season. He's usually like 1 TD pass, right? Like that's been mostly Travis Etienne's offense. So that like it's mild disappointment from the first tier, but at least they're all still sort of at the top of the ranks, and then just crushing disappointment from the second tier.
And I would say the trickle down in the gap that we've had between, I mean, not like those guys are one thing, right? Like the guys at the top of the position, the lack of players to step up into that next tier, like just functional starter tier, like guys that there are a variety of quarterbacks coming in this year. They're like, all right, we're not counting on these guys to be fantasy starters or high end starters, but they're not even running like functional offenses right now. Like I'm just looking at success rate, which is not a perfect stat, but whatever. Like Zach Wilson's at the bottom. We know the struggles that the Jets have had this year. Like our expectations have dramatically just cratered for Garrett Wilson. We're like, all right, he got 14 targets and 60 yards. We're going to go ahead and count that like as a win of a game. Steelers offense, Kenny Pickett 32. Don't have to tell you about that. How about Sam Howell? I mean, wonder why there's a lot of disappointment around that offense right now. He's 28th in success rate. Like that has not been a fun thing. The Giants with Danny Dimes at 27. Fields 26th, like we mentioned. Derek Carr, jeez, God almighty, Derek Carr 25th. 24th Deshaun Watson. The Colts bros are 22nd and 23rd. Minshew and Anthony Richardson. Jordan Love at 20th. These guys that have like not taken the step there to even be functional starters that can support fantasy receivers. Like a lot of these guys that are on this list every single week that people want to panic about, it's because of this issue, I think, at the quarterback position.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. I'm looking now at one of my leagues. The top 5 QBs are sort of the usual suspects, the guys that you would have expected. It's Allen, it's Hurts, it's Mahomes, it's Jackson, it's Tua, and then that next group, man, Russell Wilson's in there. Sam Howell's in there. Like these guys are not having good years, but they are fantasy wise. They're clinging to the top 10. And it's mostly just about the absence of the players that you would have expected to be there.
Yeah. I mean, what a disaster. Again, I think defense plays a big part in it. Defense is back. I think Steven Ruiz's article it makes a lot of really, really good quality points. On the other hand, though, I think this lack of guys to step up and sort of take the mantle as the next to this position. I mean, just think about the 2021 class, the epic busts from that class from a draft perspective. 2020, obviously, for the most part, the top is good, but then Jordan Love, like we know the deal with that. There's just a real lack of like breakout quarterbacks, I think, at this point. And even this year's rookie class, Stroud looks great. We're not going to see Richardson the rest of the season, and Bryce Young has not been good so far.
You also see this in the national discourse around the MVP, right? Like we're talking about a different guy every week. There hasn't been like 2 consecutive weeks where everybody seems to agree on who the MVP frontrunner is. It's Brock Purdy. It's Tua. Now, like today, right at this moment, it's Lamar. It is for sure going to be a different guy next week. Like that thing has changed hands. That little championship belt has changed hands absolutely every week so far.
And if you posit like Christian McCaffrey should be in the discussion or Tyreek Hill should be in the discussion. You aren't immediately told to shut the hell up because like there's not that quarterback that's sort of just, or even God forbid, like 3-4 quarterbacks just blowing the field away.
You can make a pretty good argument for like AJ Brown and Tyreek Hill right now.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that obviously is like the trickle down effect to some of these secondary receivers. And we've been talking about that a lot on the podcast. And I think we'll talk about it more in the panic meter. So with that, let's get back to the usually scheduled program here on this episode. And let's get to the coping corner first, Andy. I'm very curious who you have to introduce to the coping corner. Remember, this is where Andy and I vote in one player that it's like, no more panic. You're just coping with the reality of the situation right now. We have named Ramondre Stevenson and Najee Harris the last 2 weeks. Both guys famously scored touchdowns right after being put in the coping corner. So we could be looking at a reverse jinx situation here. But Andy, who is your nomination for the coping corner this week?
This is a slightly different, I'm putting forth this guy's name for slightly different reasons than you know what we had with Najee and Ramondre, which was basically that they'd fallen into committees that we probably should have seen coming, and that's just the way it's going to be. I understand people's panic level on Jaylen Waddle. I just I have a very difficult time condemning a player or talking about a player as a disappointment where like. We're on our third injury with Jaylen Waddle now. Like right. he had a like a rib issue in training camp, had a concussion. We had reports on Sunday night that he was either like screaming in pain in the medical tent or leaving the medical tent. He's got the back issue now, right? So like I hate to engage in conversations about what a disappointment a player has been when that player is clearly, like gutting out some stuff and is operating at far below like full capacity. I think he's a wonderful player, and maybe the whole year goes this way. Maybe we're just maybe we're just constantly dealing with a Jaylen Waddle injury. But I hate to like. I don't know. I hate for every week to become just a referendum on Jaylen Waddle and, oh, what a disappointment when, man, this guy is obviously playing through some stuff.
Yeah, especially last night, right? Like I was on Chris Harris's podcast this morning and I was like, I want to have sort of like big picture takeaways from the Dolphins offense and everything. And like, Jaylen Waddle, it's another disappointing game. So just with Devonta Smith, it's another disappointing game. One of those guys was off and on the field basically like all night in Jaylen Waddle, and he still caught 6 balls. So I agree with you. We could just be kind of running into some bad luck with Jaylen Waddle. That makes a lot of sense to me. I'm also nominating a young receiver who's dealt with some injuries. So maybe you can tell me this one if it is unfair or if we just need to cope with the reality of what it is. I think right now, Christian Watson, you need to be kind of in the coping corner with Christian Watson. Obviously, he deals with a hamstring injury. He doesn't play the first couple weeks of the season. And he's a big, I think, loser in the discussion that we just had with quarterbacks not breaking out. I mean, we're at a pretty dark place with the Jordan Love discourse. Justice Mosqueda, big Packers fan, is like posting, just Drake May and Caleb Williams pictures online. We're at that point. They're slated to pick in the top 10 if we were drafting right now. Jordan Love signs that weird contract to start the year or in the offseason where it was like, is he betting against himself? Maybe it was a good bet to make because I don't think he's played well this year. And I know they're young on offense. I get that, but he's just so clearly part of the problem that Watson, he's a guy that I think is never going to be. And this is where I sort of pushed back on Watson in the offseason was I don't think he's a guy that he's clearly a good player and a very, very explosive and very valuable player, but he's not like a target hog, right? Like if you're going to be a player that thrives with bad quarterback play, look at like DJ Moore, right? He's going to inhale a ton of volume because he's a quality number 1 receiver, even if he's not on the elite tier. Like Watson's not that guy. He just doesn't play the position that way. He's not that good of a route runner, but he's clearly explosive. And if you can hit him deep, he's going to provide big game winning plays. Well, when you play with a unfunctional quarterback or a guy that's playing below standard, you get games like 3 for 27 against the Broncos, but you get games like 3 for 91 against the Raiders. I think that's the sort of up and down thing you're going to have to ride with Christian Watson all year. And by the way, he looked like he came away from that Denver game with another injury.
Yeah, whether it's as we're speaking, I don't think we know the exact nature of the injury, but it looked like a perhaps significant knee injury. That was super worrisome. I think that Aaron Rodgers could have turned him into, not Devontae, anything like that, but somebody who was really the focus of the offense. Like, it seemed like they were trying to get to that place last year, right, where Rodgers wanted to have a lot of just like, okay, let's get to the line and you and me are going to, have a moment. And, I think he wanted to have that little mind meld situation with Christian Watson. And I think he appreciated the sort of athletic traits that Watson had that, was lacking in anybody else in that receiving core. That's just not going to be there with Love. There's just no hope of that with this version of Jordan Love.
Yeah. And that was, again, another real problem I had with him from a ADP perspective. Christian Watson, I'm like, you're counting on so many things to go right, and you're counting on Jordan Love to be close to Aaron Rodgers, what he was last year at the Packers. And I get Aaron Rodgers wasn't great with the Packers last year, but he's still freaking Aaron Rodgers. He's still a future Hall of Famer, and like, he still has whether he should or not, he still had the stones to be like, I can throw that ball to this guy down the field 20 plus yards. And right now, Jordan Love on 20 plus yard throws right now is 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, 39.4 passer rating, according to Pro Football Focus. So, I know it's somewhat early, but whether it's injuries, whether it's just the player himself, whether it's clearly the offensive environment, the quarterback, I think like if you drafted Christian Watson, luckily I think his ADP may have come down a little bit right at the end because there was an injury, but this guy was going like in the top 20 receivers.
Yeah.
At various parts of the summer last year. I think if you drafted him there, you've got to be in the coping corner at this point.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I think you're right. I think the late injury probably caused us to his ADP to back down a little bit from a level that was just all about ceiling and not even a little bit about floor.
Yeah. All right. So what do we think? Jaylen Waddle or Christian Watson for coping corner this week?
Well, I don't know. I'm partial to Waddle because I don't like. I hear a lot of it. I see a lot of it in my mentions. I just hate to engage with it. Like, I don't want to feed your dislike for a player who is clearly banged up.
Right, but that's not really cope. That's just you're ignoring them.
Yeah.
I think that's a different thing than we're saying like no more complaining, like you just have to deal like the spirit of the coping corner, Andy, is like we are telling you are no longer allowed to complain because it just is what it is and you got to suck it up and deal with it. I think with Waddle we're saying like, hey, if he can get healthy, like it's probably going to be fine. Like, all right, bottom line, Andy, and I'm not like just trying to, you did overrule me last week and didn't allow me to reverse jinx Jahan Dotson. I'm a little upset with you about that, but I promise I'm not pushing back here because I'm just caping for my submission. But like, who should cope more? The guy who has Tua as his quarterback or the guy who has Jordan Love as his quarterback?
Yeah. It's fair. I see where you're going here. I concede. I probably should have. Man, imagine if we had allowed the reverse jinx for Jahan Dotson. Washington probably wins that game.
Wow, what a power we wield here on
right?
the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. All right, so yeah, Christian Watson, drafters, you are in the coping corner. Congratulations on his touchdown next week if he's not seriously injured. But all right, that is what it is. Let's move into the Week 7 submissions for the People's Panic Meter, starting with Ethan here. We've got to talk about this subject. Ethan C sends in, as maddening as it was to lose my very important matchup in my favorite league because Bijan Robinson had an illness, ? As you can see, he looks very distressed pre-game. He sent in a tweet from Lauren Cowling where he went up to somebody and looked just fine, in the stands. I don't know. I think we all just need to get tattoos to remind ourselves that Falcons players are in a deceptively volatile situation. No matter how, good it looks on paper from a talent perspective, a volume perspective, there's always a 25% chance it'll just be something on any given Sunday. Ethan also puts on his tinfoil hat and says, back to the Bijan thing, maybe he responded really poorly in the building to criticism about running that bad route last week that ended up getting picked off. So Arthur Smith shadow benched him for a week as a punishment. Jokes aside, I expect Bijan to be back to his regular range of fantasy football outcomes next week. This is what the Falcons are doing to people with this Bijan Robinson thing. They've got Ethan fully donning the tinfoil hat, sending in pregame tweets of him talking to a fan here. Andy, what do we do about the Bijan Robinson panic?
I had some guy just beating me up on Twitter over X. Sorry, over the fact that like I didn't know, that we didn't know, that Yahoo Fantasy didn't know that Bijan was hardly going to play. But what I
very
think,
fair.
I think he hit me with like what is even the point of fantasy experts if you guys don't know this stuff? I'm like, hey, man, I'm really sorry. I'm not aware of anybody who did know this stuff other than perhaps Arthur Smith himself and Bijan. I actually think like we'd seen some people complaining about Bijan before this game. Like the previous 2 weeks and he's obviously been good every time he's on the field. He's authored some of the best highlights of the season so far. So like, that's not really an issue. He's a huge talent. He's in a good spot. He's obviously playing for a coach that, when things are going his way, he's running the ball. I think people have been mildly annoyed by Tyler Algier still being a thing, although that was fairly predictable and they definitely telegraphed it coming into the season. So I almost want to focus more on like the people who were already complaining about Bijan, which to me is just maybe a little bit greedy because at least you have a mostly healthy running back and a lot of people don't have that right now. There's more concern now than I might have allowed for a couple of weeks ago. Right, the first time I saw complaints about Bijan, I was like, "Come on, we knew he wasn't going to be a 30 touch a game guy. He's still great. This is fine." I think right now we have to assume this is just going to be a one off, and we're not going to run into this down the road. I think the intention is to give Bijan 15, 18, 20 touches a game. I hope that's their intention and that everything that we've been told about this is entirely legitimate. I don't know. It always feels weird when it's Arthur Smith.
It does feel very weird. I really don't know what to say about this, right? Like I said to Austin Eckler on the show last week, like sometimes when you're thinking like, why did this happen in fantasy football? It's just like it happens. And this is the ultimate like, hey man, happened on Sunday with Bijan Robinson and Arthur Smith. And I think I kind of want to just take it in face value, right? Like he was sick and he had a headache and they didn't want to throw him out there, although they did throw him out there for like a meaningless carry right towards the end of the game, which was just added to the layers.
Super weird. Yeah. Like if you knew that he was barely going to be usable, he probably shouldn't be active, right? Like the usage was super weird.
Yeah, that just added layers of weirdness to it. Because, like, yeah, we get this sometimes where a guy has a flare up with something in a pregame warm up and they just don't end up playing. The thing is, we usually hear about it, and the fact that we didn't hear about it, and the fact that it's Arthur Smith makes it weird. I don't know, man. I think you're probably.
We also get the thing like was it last year with T. Higgins where like, oh, we were so excited he was active coming off an injury and then he didn't play, right? Like he just stood on the sidelines all get like that comes up every year. We do get those instances. The problem everyone's having with Bijan is we had no hint, we had no rumor of any sort of health issue coming into the week.
All right, well. I don't know if we helped you with anything, but that is what it is. All right, let's move on to Neil Dutton, who sends in this about DK Metcalf.
Matt, Andy, I know we English are not supposed to panic, stiff upper lip and keep calm and carry on and all that, but I don't know if I can carry on with DK Metcalf. He hasn't finished above wide receiver 18 all season. He's got a pretty bad run of games coming. He's got a great matchup in the playoffs. That's not going to help because I can't get there. Is he ever going to score touchdowns again? Last 2 seasons, he seems to have developed an allergy to the paint. I don't know if I can stay with a guy as much as I love him because I cannot feed my family on a career-high yards per target rate. Please help.
Andy, obviously, DK Metcalf missed last week's game, but we just debated this whole Geno Smith thing. The Seahawks passing offense in general has been disappointing, and obviously DK now, I think has probably been the biggest disappointment, even though Lockett is coming off a quiet game as well.
Yeah, quiet game for Lockett. He'd not had a quiet game the week before. So like I ultimately think Tyler Lockett's fine. I kind of think both of these guys have their numbers or something close to it by the end of the season because that has been, that's been their identity as players over the years. I will say with respect to DK's injury, it takes a lot to sideline him. Like, I feel like almost every time DK has like a mid-game injury and we're really worried that, is this going to be a multi-week thing? Like, he returns to the game. Like, he has a great history of that. He has played through some stuff. So for him to actually miss one, and we have like a medley of injuries here too. It's not just one thing. That is actually pretty concerning to me. So I would say that, just on the injury front, some real concern is justified. And then the fact that, I don't know what percentage to put Geno Smith at. Like, I don't know if he's 90% of last year's Geno Smith, 85% of last year's Geno Smith, but he's not fully 2022 right. Geno Smith, which is a problem. So the combined effect of those things is not great. I understand a certain level of panic around DK.
I understand just like adjusting expectations in general for this Seahawks offense, and my expectations were very high. I think the mistake that people like myself made is that you're right. Geno is not 100% of what he was last year, but he's not gone all the way to like, he's turned back into a pumpkin type of thing. That was a popular analogy. Like, what if he turns back into a pumpkin? And I was like, he's not going to do that. But there's a wide area in the middle here, and I think that's where we're kind of fluctuating right now with Geno Smith, where I think for the most part he's been fine, and I think played good football this year, but even losing 90 or 10, 15, whatever percentage you want to put off it from last year, there's been a trickle-down effect here while they've also dealt with offensive line injuries, while Jackson Smith-Njigba is just like now finally getting involved. That's the thing. I want to see all three of these receivers on the field together operating at the height of their powers, and we haven't yet because I think that's their biggest advantage. So maybe by November, December, we're talking about a different Seahawks offense. But for right now, I think I'm allowing some level of panic on DK Metcalf and the Seahawks receivers. Jim B, popular submission this week. He sends in Justin Herbert saying, I'm not panicked because he was a 5th round pick, but I'm starting to think that Justin Herbert is fairly average. Thoughts? Justin N also sent in an email submission on Herbert, so wanted to give props for Justin for that one. Justin Herbert, man, what do we think in terms of, are the people panicked about Justin Herbert?
I think fairly average is a little strong. I don't know that I'd go there. He is not coming off a particularly good game, and the concern fantasy wise is that he hasn't really. The Minnesota game was great, right? Like he had one absolute blow up week that is to some extent propping up his season fantasy wise a little bit. It was absolutely great, and the rest of the games have been, I don't know, fine. You can win with them, but you're not winning because of them, right? It's 1 touchdown, it's 2 touchdowns. The yardage totals haven't been extreme. So I understand considering him a mild disappointment to this point. There's also some narratives around him that are just not going to go away until he makes a deep postseason run, until he's playing in an AFC championship game. And so nothing he can do about that in the regular season. I don't know. He's going to, people are going to talk about him if he throws for 500 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Bears and wins a relatively meaningless, October, November game next week. Like, it doesn't matter until this guy wins in the playoffs. To some people, I don't think he's average. I think he has a bunch of traits that any team would want in their quarterback. I think that the Chargers have solved the quarterback position. Like, I don't think, I wouldn't go perhaps as far as this person is suggesting. But I do agree that he has been at least a mild disappointment. He's still a top 10 fantasy quarterback. Again, that is propped up by a single big game. If you don't get like a good result against Chicago this week, I'd be, I would ratchet up the panic level a little bit more.
Here's my thing with Herbert and with this Chargers offense, and it's that the moment Mike Williams got wiped off the board, this offense looked completely different. Okay. And that's been the case. And it's reflected in Herbert's fantasy output, right? He leaves, Mike Williams tears his ACL week 3, Minnesota Vikings game, the game that you're mentioning, Herbert's best of the season. The week after that, he completes 54 passes for 167 yards, 1 TD, 1 interception. Has a great fantasy day because he plunged in 2 rushing touchdowns. That's typically not Herbert's game, although he can do that. Dallas, pretty rough game. Obviously, Kansas City, an even rougher game. There's the finger situation going on with him. I don't know if that has something to do with it, but overall, I am concerned that this offense revolves so much around 30-plus-year-old Keenan Allen, and just really like Josh Palmer is a solid player, but I wouldn't say he's a difference maker, but he's a solid player. And then they're just not getting anything from anybody else pass catcher wise on that team.
Yeah, the fact that they're just not getting anything at all from Johnston is I don't know. We've had the conversation about him before. Probably all should have viewed him purely as a more developmental prospect than most, and not relied on him as making an immediate fantasy splash. But the problem is, like, you take Williams out of the equation, and there's just nobody to slide in that can necessarily do those things. The other thing about Herbert is, like, they've actually fixed at least one of the things that a lot of us didn't like about last year's offense. It's not like his ADOT has come up by 2 yards, right? Like looking at his intended air yards per pass attempt, right? It's like 8.8 this year, which is that's a pretty legit number. It's a career high. Like they've solved something that we thought was a really big problem, and it hasn't necessarily mattered.
No, I think there was a little bit too much made of that. Just if we fix the ADOT, that'll, I think there's a lot more going on here with the Chargers. And I think at this point, big changes look like they'll be on their way for that organization by the end of the year. All right, one more email submission here, and then we'll get to the social media post. Joshua H sends an email titled, "Do I Just Suck?" Josh is in a neighborhood league, 8-team keeper league. He's staring at 1-6 in the face, sends us the roster. All right, Andy, there's some pieces here. Can we give this man any hope with this roster we've got, or what? I mean, 1-6, look, you're kind of trended towards the coping corner at 1-6, but like, you've just ended up with a lot of injured players and Kupp and Eckler, and then you've had some of the like bigger disappointments, but I don't know. I think this team can pull something together here.
Yeah, I think it can too. I mean, it's at 1-6. I don't know. It's if this is an 8-team league, I don't know. It's probably 4 teams that make the playoffs. It's pretty hard to get to the playoffs from a 1-6 start, and maybe you do need to think about next year. But you've got some in a keeper league. You've got some pieces that are really fun. You've still got, like, I don't know, Jalen Hurts in a keeper league is a fun thing. Zay Flowers is a fun thing. Like you've got some of the right names. You've got some good answers here. It's just the rosters elsewhere in an 8-person league are incredible, right? Like right. I'm in one of them. It's like some college buddies, and the league has been around forever, and everybody has an absolutely incredible roster. It's filthy. It's ridiculous. The whole thing comes down to luck and like late injuries, because everybody's roster every week, even through the buys, is incredible. So actually, in an 8-person league, this is, I don't know, you're fine. This is a good team in like a 12-team league, but it's not actually, like, this isn't as loaded a roster as in an 8-person league. I gotta say, like, Logan Thomas as the tight end that we're highlighting here is not great.
Right. And like, okay, you've got Kupp and Eckler, those guys suffer injuries. Devonta Smith not having the season that everybody expected him to. You're probably just banged in an 8-team league. So you don't suck. You got a little unlucky, Josh, but that's just how it happens sometimes. I think you can look forward to next year, though. You got plenty of good players to ride going into next year. I mean, CJ Stroud, how can you not be excited about that? All right, Let's get to the social media submissions here, and let's start off with @JNoob13, our weekly Calvin Ridley discourse here. JNoob says, "I understand that he's great for the Jags, but it's not helping my fantasy team. Probably my fault for taking him as high as I did." Andy, I'm rant a little bit about this. Let's relitigate this whole Calvin Ridley thing. And yes, long story short, J-Noob, and I share in this blame with you. It is your fault and my fault for ranking him, taking him as high as I did. Let's just like lay out the timeline here and see where it went wrong, Andy. Midseason last year, Jaguars trade for Calvin Ridley. It's like, oh, wow, that's really exciting. Calvin Ridley theoretically is like exactly what this team needs.
Yeah.
There it is. That should have been the analysis from then until week 1. But then, it gets closer and closer. He gets reinstated. We ratchet that excitement up. So then we just end up double counting. Wow, Calvin Ridley hasn't played in a while, but that is really intriguing. It is exactly what that offense needs. So we've 2x'd that sentiment. Then we get to training camp. The route running clips are on your timeline. He's running faster than Zay Jones in that one drill. man, Calvin Ridley is exactly what this offense from last year needed. I know he hasn't played in a while, but that is really intriguing. We've 3x'd it now. Then the preseason happens, and you're seeing the targets per route run and the target share for Calvin Ridley. And you know what you're saying? Man, Calvin Ridley is exactly what this team needed last year. That is really interesting. I know he hasn't played in a while, but who gives a crap about that? Whatever. Rust is not real. It doesn't matter because I've now 4x'd that sentiment because it was drilled into your head from October or whatever last season all the way up until week 1 this year to, I think if you had drafted and I had ranked and whatever Calvin Ridley at wide receiver 23, 24, 25, 26, maybe back to I'm the biggest fan of the hedge ranking on planet Earth. The right thing to do was to hedge rank Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley and be like, well, Kirk has played with Trevor Lawrence before, so we'll give him the slight bump. But Ridley, man, he's exactly what this team needed, man. I mean, look, he's exactly what this team needed. I know he's played in a while, but this is still really, really intriguing. And if you just stayed constant in that and let it run all the way through, done the hedge ranking in the mid-20s, you'd probably be like, yeah, we would get him a few times in the panic meter segment. But let's just be honest with ourselves, Andy. We, as, what's it called? Flag bearers of the industry. Whatever. We're the ones who dictate everything, right? Me and you. We all just got to be accountable for the fact that we let the excitement, and I am saying this, I'm not even putting this necessarily on you. I am saying this, allowed the excitement to run rampant when I guarantee you can pull up an episode of this podcast from me in October of last year saying, I am going to really try really hard to not get over enthusiastic and overexcited about Calvin Ridley. I'm going to remain cautiously optimistic. And by God, if future me didn't screw past me.
Yeah, I think the biggest the biggest problem for me was really the first half of week 1.
Right.
And that's when I finally just sent out the alert, and it seemed like, oh man, this team is building its passing game around Calvin Ridley. He's unguardable. This is absolute vintage Calvin Ridley. We're seeing it in a regular season game. That was also that Colts Jags game week 1. That was my primary game in the early window. I couldn't wait to watch it, and it was everything I wanted it to be. It was Richardson was exciting, Ridley was exciting. I thought Lawrence looked great, and it was very easy to talk yourself into this idea that, oh man, this is going to be a dozen targets a week minimum. This guy's in line for 160 on the year, and it turns out, and hey, the Jaguars probably knew this all along. That he's third on the team in targets right now, but he's barely behind Kirk and Evan Ingram. And if Zay Jones would have just been healthy, he'd be right there with him. He's basically seeing that same weekly volume. They have 4 guys that they're willing to throw the ball to, and there's no obvious, alpha. There's no clear guy who's just commanding 165 targets this season. It has been a little bit of a spin the wheel situation that is, stressful in its own way to defenses, right? You don't know exactly, it's a little bit of death by 1,000 cuts against that team, but that was, it's probably the plan going into the season. And I feel like I just got way ahead of myself in week 1 with my own enthusiasm for how he looked as early as he looked that way.
Yeah, because that was the thing. The week 1 showing, the big reveal in week 1, that was all that 4xing of that sentiment that I did was worth it. Maybe even more.
Yeah.
It might have been more than worth it, right? And you're so right to say the target total and the production of this group is pretty much the same, although Kirk's got a rather big lead in total yards just because the type of routes he runs. But I love the sentiment now. It's Christian Kirk is the actual alpha in Jacksonville. I mean, shut up, bro. The target percentage is pretty much the same. 21.8% for Christian Kirk. It's 19% for Calvin Ridley. It's 20% for Evan Ingram. There is no alpha, right? And we can probably shoot the phrase alpha into the sun when we talk about receiver rooms. Not every team, I used to say this all the time about number 1 receiver. Not every team has a number 1 receiver. I think right now the Jacksonville Jaguars don't have a number 1 receiver. That's who Calvin Ridley was supposed to be, but guy hadn't played football in a year and a half. And I mean, here we are, we're at a point where, like you said, they're doing what they can to dictate matchups. And it is working really well for the real life Jacksonville Jaguars offense. And he's basically been what they would have expected. It's just that the hype got way too over the skis in fantasy football. Not every team has a number one receiver. Not every team has an alpha receiver, right? Like AJ Brown is an alpha receiver. Calvin Ridley at this point is just not. And I will be the bearing of accountability, at fantasy receipts or whatever. It me. The call came from inside the house.
Oh yeah, man. I don't even know if I've been hit by. I don't think I've been hit by fantasy receipts in a while. Are they still a thing? Is that still a thing?
Yeah, I think they're still a thing. Hey, you don't want to get hit by fantasy receipts either. You shouldn't care. Number one, you shouldn't care. I mean, you shouldn't have a strong feeling one way or another about it. It should, don't care. Two, if you really don't want to get hit by it, don't tweet like a jackass. Okay. Yeah. Don't come out there and be like, Calvin Ridley is going to smash. All right. Save it for the podcast. Nobody's clipping the podcast. Okay. Just don't act like a jackass. Act like a jackass in the podcast. Act like a jackass in your articles. As long as you have a good relationship with your producer, and don't be a jackass to your producer, you won't have this stuff come back to bite you. But if you put it out there on Twitter and all it takes is a little quote tweet button, with an emoji, people are going to call you on your crap. Okay. But, you just got to not care about it. You got to have you got to have thicker skin than that.
Oh, that is really solid career advice overall.
Okay. We went really long on Calvin Ridley. Speed through a couple of these here before we get to the waiver wire pickups. And I could probably go on a long rant about this next one, but I've used my allotted ranting time on this episode of the podcast. So that's Rich says, Devonta Smith, ever since AJ Brown threw a temper tantrum, Smith has scored single digit points. Here's another thing we need to shoot in the sun. AJ Brown didn't throw a temper tantrum. It's not what happened. Grow up. Okay. Read a gossip magazine and grow up. But reality is, like, Devonta Smith is where he is. I keep saying, Andy, every single week, like, this looks like the week for Devonta Smith's blow-up game. It looked like the week against the Miami Dolphins with Xavier Howard out. And he's been he's not doing nothing, but he's just not doing anything of real fantasy note. Tell me why I should or shouldn't come into week 8 and be like, hey, the Washington Commanders have been blow-up friendly secondaries in the entire NFL. Why is this not the week for Devonta Smith?
Yeah, I think I'm actually, separately before we started recording the podcast, I was coming up with my list of guys that I was going to talk about in conviction picks this week. And I think I was going to talk about Devonta Smith just because I want to give the Devonta managers a pep talk. Like I don't, you're going to keep playing him. He's a great player. I think the problem that we're running into here is that AJ Brown is just having one of those seasons, right? Like I think that just might be the issue, is that AJ Brown is maybe having an all-time season, and it is really like that sucks up a lot of the oxygen, right? Like that just AJ Brown has been unguardable, uncheckable, and this is too many weeks in a row with 125 plus and just these absolute monster performances. He's so good. He's always been so good. And now it's really all coming together for him. Like again, we mentioned him earlier as somebody who, along with Tyreek, along with Christian McCaffrey, can actually enter the MVP discussion instead of just the Offensive Player of the Year discussion. This is as much about AJ Brown as it is about Devonta Smith. I think instead of this being like a 1 and 1A, this is pretty clearly a 1 and a 2 at this point.
Yeah, 1B receiver might need to go in the toilet bowl with alpha receiver as well. I'm considering making a lot of amends to receiver terminology here in the next offseason. By the way, AJ Brown is having one of those seasons, but the Eagles offense is not having one of those seasons, right? And I think that's really the trickle-down effect to the number 2 receiver in the offense here. At Cuban Links says the ghost of Aaron Jones, and they sent it a pretty good gif with this one. And I'm definitely panicked on Aaron Jones from an offensive environment standpoint, how important he is to the environment being quality in Green Bay, but yet availability has been a big problem for Jones as well.
Yeah, I haven't read anything specific about this just yet. It certainly feels like, the talent gap between a healthy Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon is not insubstantial, and so I have to believe that what was going on this past week was some sort of snap count. I think he played 23 snaps, something like that. It was relatively low. He saw the ball a lot when he was on the field. but a lot of AJ Dillon at the end too. So I feel like he was probably just limited to a certain number of plays. I hope that's the case. It was good that he got back. I mean, we basically have one game this year with a mostly fully healthy Aaron Jones, and he was the absolute centerpiece of the offense in opening week, right? Like the whole thing worked because he was in the middle of it, and I hate to do this generally, but like there were a handful of moments where AJ Dillon's fine. AJ Dillon's perfectly fine. And if you've got AJ Dillon on a roster and you're riding him, good for you. RB2, flex, whatever. There are some moments where I would just really like to see what Aaron Jones would do with that touch. Like that was definitely there against Denver. But he's clearly not 100% right now. It's been a little bit of sketchy, ambiguous information about the injury. The bummer is like when he first got hurt, he didn't even seem to be taking it seriously. Remember, he was like getting stretched out on the sideline, waving at the overhead camera, like he was talking after the game, like it was not a big deal. If it had been a bigger game, he would have. The game hadn't been decided, he would have been out there. But he's clearly aggravated it at some point. It's clearly still bothering him. Hamstrings are sort of notorious. So I just hope he gets right, and I hope whatever restrictions are on him right now are lifted soon, because I have some 3 and 3 and 2 and 4 teams that have Aaron Jones that are barely clinging to life, and we're going to need him in the second half.
Yeah, I'm at panic and close to cope with Aaron Jones, but that's just me. Same with this one. Next one. At Stack6Stack says Deshaun Watson. I'm pondering a rage drop. I'm gonna go ahead and tell you can rage drop Deshaun Watson because there's something weird going on there. And I don't really. I mean, he's not playing any better than he did last year, and he's not on the field.
Yeah, no, he's not playing well at all. It wasn't like, I don't know. They've just handled it so strangely too. And they didn't just come right out and say that it was an aggravation of the shoulder issue or it was something with the shoulder. Like the cameras pretty clearly caught him on the sideline talking to a coach, pointing at his shoulder. I think it's shoulder related, but like they haven't been entirely specific about that. I don't know if he needs to go on IR. What good is it to tease us with the possibility of him playing? The other frustrating thing is that, like, man, how good would these Browns be with an early career Deshaun Watson right now, right?
I mean,
the defense is awesome. They have a defensive player of the year candidate. They have talent at the receiving spot. Like this is a ready-made team for like young Deshaun Watson. And he's just been he continues to be a shadow of his former self, and now he's hurt, right? And he's hurt in a way that is going to compromise his ability to play. So I fully agree with you that I spent too many words here. But I co-sign. You can drop him. You can drop him without an ad. Sure.
Just go for the rage drop. Go for it. All right. Last one here at 4Bs. BBBB Pars 403. Puzzled at Josh Jacobs. He was not used and was shut out, and the Raiders are in trouble going forward. The Raiders are in trouble going forward. Kevin Clark has a bit where he calls coaches pre-fired. And he said Josh McDaniels has been pre-fired since the day he was hired by the Las Vegas Raiders. And I can't think of a more perfect way of saying it. It's so true. One of the most directionless franchises in the entire NFL right now. And I'm getting a little close to coping corner with Josh Jacobs in the point that Josh Jacobs is probably going to be fine. He's not going to be god awful, but he's got no running room. This team stinks. He's probably just not going to pay back like a second round pick value at this point.
Yeah, I can't give anybody a pep talk. I again, having just watched that Bears Raiders game, Max Crosby was going hard all game, but he had some fair-minded criticism for the rest of his teammates after that one. That is a dumpster fire of a team right now. Josh Jacobs does not have a lot of room. He's getting hit in the backfield more often than I think we've ever seen it. He actually had some really nice runs where you're like, wow, that was a very nice 5-yard gain, 4-yard gain, right? But nothing's going to pop in that offense at this moment. He had the near touchdown catch where he got 1 foot down, didn't get both feet in bounds. So it was almost a tolerable fantasy performance. But I'm sad about it too, because I have a fair amount of Josh Jacobs. I think he's a great player, but it's hard to see a 2-touchdown, 3-touchdown, 150-yard performance coming from that guy right now, given the team context. Yeah,
totally agree. What a shame. What a shame. All right. Let's finish this thing off, Andy. Give us the top 5 waiver wire pickups of week number 8. Look, a lot of sadness we talked about in this episode. So we really need you to finish on a positive note here. And what's more positive than the beauty of a weekly waiver wire segment?
I will say I'm going to list 5 guys. I think 2 of them are like really key pickups that you can just plug and play this week. I'll throw a third guy in there. But I only listed
they're all going to change the course of your season. Okay,
that's what I meant to say. That's
positivity,
what I meant to say.
Andy. You're screwed if you have Aaron Jones. You're screwed if you have Josh Jacobs. But God help you, you could pick up Darrell Henderson. I mean, come on.
Let's wind that back, and I'll pretend that I'm one of those Twitter threads guys, and I'll be like, these are 5 players that you must add in your fantasy league who are going to go supernova in week 8. These are your league winners. We'll start with Tank Dell. Tank Dell is, I almost feel a little sheepish including him here because he's 48% rostered. He nearly clears the threshold where I don't even talk about guys anymore. But this is somebody who probably needs to be on a roster in any like 10-team league. He's averaging about 65 receiving yards per week. He's had a couple of blow-up weeks already this season. The only reason he's on the wire is that he was on bye and he was concussed before that. So like if he's out there for you, I think he's worth adding. That's a really fun passing game. My number 4 is Tyjae Spears. People don't need me to tell you that if anything goes down with Derrick Henry, whether it's an injury, a trade, whatever, Tyjae Spears is going to get really exciting. He's averaged over 6 yards per touch this year. He's got 15 catches out of that backfield. It is a dreadful offense, and I'm not encouraging you to necessarily watch the Titans, but he is a really fun player. He's seen the field from the moment that he joined the team too, right? He's 50% of the snaps plus almost every week. My number 3, and this is just kind of a flyer, and I actually think he's kind of an interesting trade piece for a lot of you, but Kyler Murray is still about 42, 43% rostered right now. I'm not going to make any big promises about Kyler Murray looking like vintage Kyler, rushing for 65, 75 yards a game when he comes back. He's coming back from an ACL. He's only 10 months removed from it. But he is going to be a good player in a decent spot, assuming that team holds on to Hollywood Brown. They've got some interesting young pieces. I think he's somebody who can play as like a top 10-ish fantasy quarterback over the second half of the season. We probably get to see him in like week 9, week 10. My number 2, and I don't think this is a great player necessarily, but this is a running back with a huge workload, a beefy workload. Darrell Henderson. Back in our fantasy lives, the Rams actually waived him like 11 months ago. He gets that job, he loses that job, he gets that job, he loses it again. This has been the cycle for like 3 years. He's got it again. Had 19 touches this past week, 66 yards, a touchdown. I think we're looking at similar workloads moving forward. It's pretty clearly not going to be Zach Evans. It's going to be Darrell Henderson, who they just added off the street, and it's going to be Royce Freeman. And those 2 guys are both going to be flexible. Maybe not so much this coming week against Dallas, certainly the following week against Green Bay. And then my number 1 is somebody who should not be eligible for this segment. We've talked about him before, and yet he's still here. Only 35% rostered, and that's Josh Downs. He's had 3 great weeks in a row. He's scored in back-to-back weeks. He has been from opening week a huge part of the Indianapolis offense. He plays 70+% of the snaps. He's come into the season as their primary slot guy. We saw him really get downfield in week 7. He finished with 125 yards, had a long touchdown. Minshew playing well. He's going to, especially in PPR leagues, this is somebody that you're going to be throwing out there throughout the buys, throughout the rest of the season. Like, he's good for 5 catches a week. I'm very impressed with Josh Downs. Incredible collegiate career. I think 195 catches over his final 2 seasons at UNC. So really good player who has adapted extremely well. I am puzzled at his roster percentage, and I would like to think that it gets over 50. In fact, I'd like to think that it gets over 70 as we clear waivers this week.
I would posit that Josh Downs, like this side of Puka Nacua, because Puka is doing, crazy stuff and looks incredible. And by the way, just one quick point on Puka. Number 1, the eye test, like reception perception, the film, whatever, totally backs up what he's doing. Like, he just has been the best offensive rookie in the NFL this year. And I know he's a 5th round pick, but someone in my Discord, Major Corker, made a great point. That if Jackson Smith and Jigbo was doing what Puka Nacua was doing right now, he would be like the dynasty wide receiver 1, and he would be impossible to trade for. Like, you couldn't offer up you could offer your firstborn and people would still say no for if it was Jackson Smith and Njigba doing this. So, Puka's kind of in his own tier with rookie receivers. I would posit, though, that Josh Downs, I know Zay Flowers had really good moments. Jordan Addison, maybe he's had 3 touchdowns against the 49ers on Monday night since after we've recorded this. Rashee Rice is doing his thing. I think Josh Downs has looked the best outside of Puka among the rookie receivers. So yeah, the fact that he was available in 65% of leagues on Sunday morning here at Yahoo is shameful. It's an embarrassment.
It tells me that I'm not really doing my job, because I've actually written about him I don't know, this is going to be like a month straight in which we've written about him every week, talked about him somewhere in some clip. It's obviously not sticking. I assume this is the week it's going to stick, because he's going to finish this week as a top 5 fantasy receiver. And generally those guys get plucked.
Let me just say this, Andy. Maybe it's not you're not doing your job. Our bosses probably don't want to hear this. We probably shouldn't even say it to our bosses, but there's multiple million people playing on Yahoo. I'm looking at the official reported number from at least one outlet. I'm not going to say it here on the podcast in case I get fired for it. I'm just going to say that all of those multiple million people might not be listening to this podcast or reading our articles. And after you and I have brought up Twitter thread bros and fantasy receipts on this podcast, honestly, I kind of think those multiple million people might be making the right move. And if there was ever a post week 7 heading into week 8 thing on this podcast, is you could tell Andy and I have become unhinged enough to start bringing real life Twitter bits to the show. Not great.
Are you telling me this podcast does not have trillions of downloads? We're not we're not getting how many million listens every day, every week?
Well, listen, it's just under the multiple million mark I'm looking at here, but what I'm saying is all of you millions of people that are listening to this right now and, haven't turned it off when I made a fantasy receipts joke or Andy did the Twitter threads things. Thank you for staying this long into the podcast. Please tell your millions of friends about the show so that we can get Josh Downs' roster percentage up, for God's sakes, man. What
Seriously.
are we doing?
Seriously.
All right.
Well said.
All right. That will be about enough. Usually I say that's going to do it for today's show. I'll say that'll be about enough for today's show. Hey, one quick reminder for the millions of people listening to this. You're probably not among the millions of people that need to be signing up for an NBA, basketball league. Come on. What are we doing? Well, the NFL season is in full swing. The NBA season is right around the corner. It has never been a better time to sign up for fantasy basketball with some buddies or even some strangers. Whatever. Draft your league at yahoofantasy.com or the Yahoo Fantasy app with millions and millions of other people. On Wednesday, Eckler's Edge. It's back. My God, we have plenty to talk about with Austin at this point. Should be another fantastic episode. Until then, we're out.